have a chance to answer any questions, or if you want to say anything, we have John himself here. Gene will be back in just a moment. I'm Jeff Shear. I'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
Does this work?
Yeah, it's on.
I just want to say before anybody asks questions, how honored I've been and am to have Jeff do this. Someone asked me how this happened, and it's all in Jeff's mind. And he wanted to do it, and first he spoke to Gene, and he spoke to me, and he's done it. And I'm very honored. It's really a large part of hometown crowd, and I think it's so wonderful for you all to be here this evening and make it a great evening. I can tell you what Jeff has done is true. It makes me tear up a little when we talk about that. That is all true. The fellow who was with me when I made that phone call to Gene, we've been working on a case for a long time.
It's a true story.
I couldn't make that up.
We didn't make it, and this fellow's name was Nick Flannery, and he's a lawyer, and he tried the Boston, Massachusetts school case, the desegregation case, very large case way back then, and then became a judge. But he had worked in the division many years, and he and I had several other adventures together, and he was a really fine lawyer, as many in the civil rights division were. So I'm honored by Jeff did it all.
Jeff put it together, unbelievable.
It's on. You can just sit there.
Are you on? Am I? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Jeff, it just is an amazing man to be able to pull these threads together. I mean, you don't, as you're living your life, you don't see the threads the way we saw them today. And it's quite something. And I also am grateful that you brought in the Jewish components of Tikkun Olam and Ador V'Ador. I mean, just tzedakah has been part of my life for 58 years, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you. So some people ask me kind of what was the process and how did I do this, if you want that aspect. I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas, and I got enamored at a young age. I found a VHS tape at the library of Henry Fonda playing Clarence Darrow. And I always wanted to do something like that. And it took me a long time to realize that I knew somebody like that. I had worked with the Department of Public Advocacy as a public defender and moved up through the leadership and had an opportunity to work with the commission and met John there and knew him for many years until it dawned on me that I didn't need to look any farther for who I could do a play about, that there was a hero in my life that I knew. Thought some about that, had the opportunity at a retirement party for a friend of ours, Scott West. I asked Gene, Gene asked me yesterday, why did you ask me first? I don't remember, probably because John was deep in a conversation and Gene was waiting for him to finish, so I talked to Gene first. And then I got their permission because there's no way I would want to do it if they weren't behind it. And I had a huge head start for a lot of these sort of projects. That means hours and hours of interviewing and getting the background information. And a lot of that work has already been done. John and Gene have been interviewed by the Smithsonian, by different history centers, by different Jewish groups. So there was a lot of source material for me to work with. And I started putting it together. Many drafts of this script have come along, and sending them to John and Gene all the way through and getting their feedback because I wanted them to be comfortable with it. But this is the first time they've seen. I didn't want them to see it until it was ready. I did a performance a couple of months ago in my hometown of Lawrence, Kansas, and then was able to bring it here, and then we're in Versailles in a couple weeks where Annie lives, their daughter, and that's my hometown.
I'm amazed that you could do such a good job.
Thank you.
I agree.
It's been just a huge joy in my life and a privilege to get to know them and to try to see the world through John and Jean's eyes at this point in time. I think has been cathartic to me, is watching what's going on in the world. And they've also started, like, John sent me transcripts of cassette tapes that were done in Thanksgiving in 1981, I believe, by his brother, that added a bunch of the nice threads together. I added the part about knowing the man in the apartment who was there, whose wife was the midwife. And John emailed me and said, that's an amazing story. It's not true, but it's great. And I had to email him back, here's where your mother tells that story in the transcript, that it's real. And the Dr. Mosher parallel came out of his father telling the story. That wasn't something that I was aware of until I got those cassettes, that Dr. Moser, the same man that he had taken around town, was the one who was able to get them on that ship.
And the Joseph family, amazingly, really, the son was sent by the family to the United States on what was then called a kinderlift. In the 30s, a lot of Jewish families who were worried about the future started sending their children to the United States and to England, and to families that fostered them. I guess some may have been adopted, but in this case, the daughter, who'd been our babysitter, was sick and couldn't go. He was sent, though, he went to a family in Detroit and then joined the Army when he was of age during the Second World War, went to Germany and then to England and married a woman who was in the RAF, and they went back to, and then brought him back to Detroit, and they had 3 daughters. And believe it or not, a few years ago, I got an email, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It says, "Are you John Rosenberg from Magdeburg?" And it was from Nancy Joseph Wright, who was working at Cardinal Hill, and the email was from her sister, who was a psychologist living in Somerset. So 2 of those daughters, the grandchildren of the Josephs in Germany, landed in Kentucky, of all places, and we became very good friends. And not to believe, but Nancy Wright, who was at Cardinal Hill, a therapist, ended up marrying one of her patients, Stuart Wright, from Prestonsburg, Kentucky, for whom the football field was named just recently, because he was paralyzed in a serious accident, and then went to Cardinal Hill to be treated, where he met his Nancy. And they have a daughter who lives in Lexington, has a little nail, we call those shops where people, nail salon. But we've become very good friends with both families. The third daughter lives in Michigan, was married also to a lawyer, a labor lawyer, represented unions, and we've seen each other. But isn't that quite something? You just, small world, right?
If you don't remember who the Josephs were, they were the babysitter's family that when John's mother had to split them up, that his brother Harry went to.
Yeah, that was the family legend. My mother always said when she dropped my brother off, who was 2, at, I was trying to think of what anyway, the mother in the family said, when you come back in a week, he'll be potty trained.
Yeah, I didn't put that in the play.
No.
Yeah. What I get from the interviews is Harry was kind of a handful at that stage. We have a question here in the back.
Yeah, I'm curious as a playwright, dealing with the subject. You were the playwright.
Yes, yeah, I wrote this.
So I imagine you had an enormous amount of material that didn't actually get into the
Absolutely,
production.
yeah.
I'm sure those were really fabulous stories as well. And so I'm I'm assuming that between the two of you had to start to get the essence of this. But I would imagine that if you were to use all the other material, this could have gone on for hours.
Sure, yeah, it could be, I think there's a book in the works, it's not by me, but it could be a long miniseries or something that, but yeah, John's 94 years old, and I did a play that was about 75 to 80 minutes, so we cut out a lot, yeah. Yes.
Where does the play go from here, anyway?
I'd like to take it everywhere that'll have it. My next performance is in Versailles in 2 weeks from tonight. And then I'm talking with the Holocaust Center in Cincinnati. If you have any connections, that's one reason why there's someone going around. Can you say something positive about the play? Because I send those out to places. I'd love to tour around the country. I'm not looking to make any money off of this. The money's going to Apple Red and to other organizations that John cares about. I'm just kind of looking not to lose money. So if someone will fly me in and do a show, if you have connections anywhere, I love doing it in real theater spaces, but it's designed to be very portable. So I hope to do it for many years to come, as far as I can. And I think this is a story people need to hear. Particularly now, every day, I see stuff in the news that this resonates with me. Yes?
I have two questions. What was Harry's German name? Horst.
Harry's what?
Horst.
Horst. H-O-R-S-T.
And how long was the journey on the boat from Denmark to the US?
I think it was sort of Charlie, 10 days or so. As Jeff mentioned, it kind of slowed down because they were looking for mines, German U-boats and things like that as we were going over. But for a kid my age at that time, it was really an adventure for running around on a ship and seeing this colorized version of I think it was the first major motion picture in color, The Wizard of Oz. And then I ended up, we were in New York for 6 months. My dad went south to a couple of communities that didn't have rabbis, rabbis, and during the week he was a janitor in a textile mill, and eventually moved to Gastonia and became an office manager in a mill that was owned by a fellow that brought his factory over from Germany, another Jewish family actually that started in Magdeburg, but he was living elsewhere. But that's where I grew up most of the time, was in Gastonia, North Carolina.
That's, an example of, where the playwright artist comes in that, that I've struggled with, and hopefully it's okay. I did not tell his father has a great story of coming to New York and that side of it, but I chose to leave that out and leave it ambiguous so that you wouldn't know whether he survived when they were taken to Rosenberg, so that we could have that moment in the play that John would have lived when he was 7, but not to give that up through the chronology of the play. So I just tried to be vague about what happened to his father, and that meant cutting a lot of cool stuff. So that might be the part 2 or something about his father.
Gene and I visited on that trip when we went back for the laying of these Stolpersteine, the stumbling blocks in the ground. We were able to take a separate trip to Buchenwald, to the concentration camp where my dad spent some time, and and they tour you, and it's a pretty sad story of its own. And when we were in Atlanta not too long ago, there's a photograph of probably 1,000 Jewish men standing in this courtyard. And I think many days that's all they did was stand, which I don't know how anybody does it. And of the 125, about 25 of those men died or were killed or ran into the fence or didn't make it. Some went mad. So it was a very difficult time, I think. But this picture of all these folks standing around together is just, it's very powerful. And it happened to be, I'd never seen it before when there's a small Holocaust museum in Atlanta. And by the way, if the one in now, there's a a newer one in Cincinnati, if you, that Jeff mentioned, if you have the opportunity to go. It's in the train station, whereas the IMAX, it used to be, it really was a train station, but the last few years, they've tried different things, and there was a small Holocaust museum in a Jewish, called yeshiva, but a private school in the suburbs, and then they were able to get some funding, and now they have this particular, the Holocaust Museum in Cincinnati is really worth a trip. I mean, it's quite powerful, and they're getting an exhibit in the next week or two about Auschwitz, where so many Jews were murdered, but which is coming for several months. But if you have the chance to go to Cincinnati, and it's at the train station.
And that train station is a place where Jews arrived when they were coming, so there's a connection.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, the huge Art Deco building.
There's a very large Jewish community in Cincinnati, and I think, and a lot of history in the community from the time they started coming in. So I ask, because I say we, Gene and I, we belong to a congregation in Huntington, West Virginia, which is the closest one to Prestonsburg. There's also there are about 16,000 Jews in Kentucky. Over half of them are in the Louisville area. And in Lexington has two synagogues, a Reform and a Conservative. And Louisville also has an Orthodox. And a Chabad, well, which is another organization that is worldwide, which is Orthodox, but addresses primarily students while they're in college and other young people. But the Lexington has, as I said, is Reform and Conservative, and the congregation in Huntington, and one of the members came this evening who lives in Williamson. The Huntington congregation is conservative, but you're all welcome. Usually when I talk to students or anytime, we used to go to Williamson, West Virginia, which had a fairly large Jewish community during the 30s and 40s. And over time, people moved out, the younger generation left. And when we started going, actually, the rabbi from Huntington used to come down there on a Sunday night once a month and have services. And most of the Jewish community lived in South Williamson, Kentucky, and the synagogue was in Williamson itself, but it was closed. We closed it. We were still members at that time. It was closed a few years ago, and the pews and all of that ended up in a new congregation in Pittsburgh. But the members either went to Charleston or to Huntington, which has a very large synagogue, a very beautiful building, not a very large congregation, but you're all welcome. I always tell people that services are on Friday night and often on Saturday morning, and Dr. Baylor from Prestonsburg, who helped found the mosque there, he went to the Huntington to services with me over there. We kind of talked about our respective faiths, but he's now a retired surgeon there. A lot of you probably know him.
Question over here.
Hi, John. So the timing of your departure was really on the eve of the death camps really started, as far as I understand my history. And so the story about how right after your family left Holland, that the port was lit by that's it's just an amazing story about how your family was able to get out of there. My family, I have roots. My
you have a sense what was happening before Kristallnacht, when things were getting worse?
I did not, and I think I tell people, I think my parents were very protective. They had a fairly large circle of friends in Germany, and were living kind of a middle-class life. Usually I have a little PowerPoint that I show people of mother, my mom, and walking in the park with my brother and with me. He was just a carriage at that time, but I really didn't, and it always surprises me because in more recent years, as I've become more and more interested in the Holocaust, the American Bar Association, for example, has an exhibit called Lawyers Without Rights, which is a series of panels that talks about lawyers who lost their right to practice or they even lost their lives during the 30s, and that so much of this began to happen after Hitler first was elected or became the chancellor in the early 30s or middle 30s, and that I was pretty unaware of it. I mean, I was in school with, probably by the time I started school, Hitler in 1937 decreed that Jewish kids could no longer be in school with non-Jewish kids. I can't remember if I ever was in the other classrooms. So I ended up actually being in my father started, and another gentleman named something like Moser, but it wasn't the same Moser, started a school for Jewish children in Magdeburg. And I think my dad had the elementary school classes, and the other fellow took the high school, and they found a building right near the synagogue, as Jeff mentioned. So but my own memory, I mean, Jeff is right about the way that the signs appeared on the doors, and even as when you read all of this about how bad it was, you have to kind of ask yourself, what was my father and others thinking who did not? My mother's family, my mom's father, she had two sisters, had a butcher shop in a small town called Ida Oberstein, which was the first place where my father started teaching school and teaching religious classes, and he took his meals with my mom's family, and she was actually a student, and eventually they got married a couple of years later. But, they moved into an apartment in Magdeburg initially when he got that job, and eventually they moved and he used to bicycle into work. They were a young couple, fairly, not married very long, and so when he was teaching school, when they moved next to the synagogue where we lived before all this terrible thing happened, they had a fairly large circle of friends in the Jewish community. And I think it wasn't apparent, certainly to me as a child, but it must have been apparent to them that things were getting very difficult. And some people started leaving, like my father, like my grandfather. And I saw, you may have seen it, PBS just did a documentary on Henry Kissinger, whose family was Jewish, and they left in 1937.
So did your two uncles. Yeah. Two uncles that came to this country.
Yeah, and two of my father's sisters and the uncles came on over, and but many did not. So my dad, as a Johnny-come-lately, really in the very last days of 37 and 8, got all these papers together that Jeff mentioned, and was able to get together all the papers that you needed. And then the other problem was that in this country, you had to find a sponsor who was willing to stand good for you. So a family, so that if the family came over and you didn't find a job and wasn't able to take care of itself, that the sponsor was willing to, that was before the welfare system really got started, Gene and I sponsored a, from a young woman who was in our community for a while. She was from Eritrea. We had a professor at the community college for a while who was helping families immigrate from over there. But in any event, so you have to sign on the dotted line even now when you're gonna, when you're gonna sponsor someone, that you would do that financially. Well, when they were looking for someone to sponsor my father and mother and us, and the relatives had just come over, and they were all had very basic jobs and could barely take care of themselves. So one of my father's sisters found a distant relative, a distant cousin in downtown New York who was an architect, and he first was not so sure because he'd already sponsored somebody else. Anyway, he agreed to sponsor us, and that was important. But the Joseph family, for example, they didn't make it either, and Jeff mentioned our own family. I think it's either 12 or 14 immediate family members that didn't make it. We have a letter from the Joseph's father at that time. They were pretty well off, but they didn't get all these things together, and he writes a letter at the end to his son saying at that point he was a laborer, and his wife her health was bad, and they knew they were going to get picked up, sent to Poland. They knew they were going to die, and it's kind of a teary letter, obviously, like, be a good boy, stay out of politics, and he had a good friend who was a priest in Germany, and was able to get the letter to his son. He said he hadn't heard from his son in over a year, and he was worried, but they got these documents together, the Joseph family, and so it represented, I'm sure, what many others. In fact, I remember, I don't know if some of you may know, Mike Weinrip was a reporter with the New York Times. He was in Hazard as a reporter for the Courier Journal for many years, and then he wrote a very nice article about Apple Red when we were having funding troubles, and Mike at that time, and Mike wrote an article which I've never been able to find, but basically the article was about a number of families who were writing back and forth from Germany and other countries to their families in this country, asking them to help get them out, to find sponsors or to send money. I mean, it's more of the same. It's just very teary. And this country at that time, you have to remember, still had a quota. It wasn't like everybody came in. The State Department was not very friendly to Jewish immigrants in those earlier days, and but they had a quota, and so it's a miracle, I think, in a way, that we were able to get that we were here, and that we're here today. I always tell people we had a wonderful woman in our community for a while. So many of you may remember Bertha Daniels, and when you ask Bertha, how are you doing today, Bertha? She'd always say, I'm truly blessed. So we certainly feel like we're truly blessed.
Maybe one more question?
Sorry, how long have you been working on this, and has the title changed since John went back to Germany, and is that where the Stumbling Stones?
Yeah, I think I started working on it after the Germany trip, so I didn't have a title for a long time until I just been working. I think it was about a year ago now, started really working on collecting and reading, and then kind of narrowing down things. The Stumbling Stones didn't strike me for a while. I was enamored. There's a book that has a great interview of John in it called This Is Home Now. I really loved that title when it was taken. And then Stumbling Stones, there's so many things in this play that writers would invent to make things make sense, and Stumbling Stones is one of those things, and the being able to end with his name in two different swears, being able to, like, the Wizard of Oz, of course this is about building a home and getting home, and he saw the wizard. There's just all these things that, you know, as you start to look through it, through a writer's eye, all these things weave together, and then like the things that John was talking about that I didn't include, but there's just, I don't know if that's just how life is for all of us, but in John's case, it became pretty obvious for me. But it's been,
It's been very educational, I have to say, and, you know, we've made it real, you know, the time and the war and all that, you know, it was very flat.
thanks. So I guess as we wrap up, if John and Jean, I give you a chance to say anything else before we finish?
You can buy that book, This Is Home Now,
This
on
Is Home.
Amazon, can't you,
Yeah.
John?
Yes.
It's in paperback now, I think it's about, and if you, let me know if you want one, we sell it for about $25, and it all goes to Apple Red.
Even if you
I-
get it on Amazon or do you have it?
No,
You have to
not
call
through it,
John
no,
Rosenberg.
you can order them directly without me, no, you can order it from Amazon on, you'll have to pay for
That
it.
goes to Jeff Bezos, or you can get it in a way that gives money to Apple.
We can
Red.
get them from
Yeah.
Eugene or where?
Yeah,
Okay,
Sure.
autographed, of course.
sure, yeah, just tell us who to write, certainly, it's easy to do that. Actually, the book, Arvin Donahue, by the way, is, she had worked in the Holocaust Museum and came back to, when she came back to Kentucky, she wanted to interview one that was more interested in survivors who were in Kentucky, and especially ones who didn't live in large cities. I mean, we don't have that many, basically, you got New York, Baltimore, whatever, but, so she did these interviews, and then she came to Prestonsburg, and one of them is the one about me, and Arvin is, since they grew, she and her husband are farmers and lived not too far from Lexington at one point, and and then she has since written a really lovely little book called Landings, in which she also illustrated about their life on the farm when their daughter was growing up. Her daughter's finished college now, but is also a real fine fiddler, and Arvin's just a lovely person, so she's done a lot of other personal interviews, did some with the Pritchard Committee, and has, anyway, the book is This Is Home Now, it's now in paperback, and, yeah, just let us know if you'd like a copy, you want one. I'm happy to give some, we'll give them away, we have a box or two. Most of the folks who are here from home, I don't know, we'll give you a book, we'll be happy to send it. You can donate to Apple Red or Highest. I always tell people, one of the things, I don't know, Jeff alluded to, is that in the end, my father, at that point, they had no money left, even though they had brought some furniture over, but they had no money left when we got on the ship. And the fare was paid by an organization called HIAS, H-I-A-S, which stands for Hebrew International, something at the time. It started as a nonprofit that worked with Jewish refugees, and now if you look at it online, hias.com, they work with refugees all over the world. I mean, it's a marvelous organization. So I usually say, don't forget to donate to Hias. I mean, Apple Red first. Or we also have a group called the Appalachian Citizens Law Center. I shouldn't forget them. They're in Whitesburg, a nonprofit that we started, that we moved all the coal-related work and black lung work to the ACLC, to the Appalachian Citizens Law Center in Whitesburg, so Apple Red could concentrate on poverty work that not necessarily coal-related, so consumer work, Social Security, family law, that sort of thing.
And next week, John is gonna, with his courage in his hand, gonna be dancing for the Floyd County Homeless Shelter fundraiser.
My partner, there she is, Charlotte Soder.
Yay.
She's still trying
She
to
has
teach
taught
us.
John the box step.
Right.
Listen, that is an accomplishment.
Just in wrapping up, so on that card that you got when you came in, there's the web pages on the back as a QR code, or they're just written out there. The places that John just mentioned to donate, there are links there, you can donate directly
Sure.
through that online. My ask for you is to help me in spreading this word. If you feel comfortable, I think there's someone still available to do videos. If I put the little videos on the social media and try to get people to do that, or you could either through the contact thing on that webpage or on any of my social medias, leave a comment about tonight, and I can weave that together. So if you follow the Facebook page or the Instagram, comment on anything and say something nice about the play, and then I'll use that in trying to spread the word. I want to do this as much as I can and in many places as I can.
I'm gonna try to be happy for it to come to Prestonsburg. I think the Versailles thing just worked out really well.
That works. That's my hometown, so I know the people who run that theater. So that's where we're next. Hopefully we'll be back. We'll be back in this area, working at Whitesburg, working on Huntington and Prestonsburg, are all in conversation.
Yeah, we saw Jeff in a wonderful, in an Arthur Miller play called The Crucible just recently there. So he's also an actor and an improv person and a teacher, former public defender, so couldn't be better, but I'm sure we'll get it to Prestonsburg.
No. This is what I'm most proud of doing right now, and thank you for sharing it with us tonight. I want to thank Shannon and Keith and Thad and the folks from the Appalachian Center for the Arts. Have been so welcoming and so great to work with to help make this happen and to share John's story here in
Thanks for
Pikeville.
staying.
Thanks for staying.